Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Peter Llewellyn, and I run the services at MedComsNetworking.com for the global MedComms community, by which I mean people who work in and around medical communications, medical education, and medical publishing. As a part of that, an important part of that, I've been providing information and services to people who want to join MedComms and find out more about the business. And you'll find lots of free information, articles, videos, guides, at FirstMedCommsJob.com, including a careers guide about regulatory medical writing specifically, which has been supported by Insight Medical Writing. And in fact, we've just issued the most recent. So every year we update it, and we've just updated the issue in September. So you can find that at FirstMedCommsJob.com. I thought it'd be good to bring a couple of guys from Insight Medical Writing online today to talk specifically about medical writing and how it fits alongside the more usual topics we talk about in medical communications. So delighted to have Kelly and Amy with us today. We're going to have a presentation, we're going to have a Q&A, and I'm going to hand over to Kelly and let her get on with it. Thank you very much, Kelly.
Hi, Peter. Thank you. I'll just share my screen. Hi, everybody. So as Peter said, we're here from Insight Medical Writing to talk you through what it takes to be a regulatory writer. And we're going to talk to you about our company, Insight Medical Writing, and also what qualifications and skills you need to take up an entry-level position, career progression opportunities at Insight, and also a typical day and how we work on typical projects. Insight has been established for over 18 years, and we've been a global service provider for major pharmaceutical companies, small biotechs, and startup companies. Our client base has expanded over the 18 years. We often have word of mouth recommendations from existing clients and get new clients, or we've retained many clients over the years due to our commitment to quality and the documents that we provide. So I'll introduce myself first, and then I'll let Amy introduce her in a bit more detail. So I started at Insight 15 years ago after a short period in another small CRO for 18 months as a medical writer. Before that, I did my PhD in biomedical sciences and then went straight from an academic environment into medical writing with no postdoc or no transition in the middle. So, Amy?
Hi everyone, I'm Amy and I've been working at Insight for just over a year now. I think my journey into medical writing is quite typical of many writers really. So I started off my PhD with the full intention of either using it to progress in academia or to become a scientist for a pharmaceutical company. And I'd say in about my second year, I really did start to feel I wasn't enjoying the lab work so much, but I really did love preparing for conferences, presenting at lab meetings, writing publications, all that sort of side of things. So I went to a seminar in my second year and the career speaker there mentioned medical writing, and I'd never actually heard of medical writing before. It wasn't covered in much detail at the seminar itself. So I just went and had a quick Google later on, and I came across the FirstMedCommsJob.com website, and I read a couple of the careers guides in there, and I just remember being so relieved that I was reading the qualities of a medical writer, and I was thinking this sounds a lot like me. So I was really pleased, and I went along to one of the careers fairs in Oxford, and I met with a lot of the agencies there, and one of these was Insight Medical Writing. I had an in-depth chat with them about exactly what regulatory writing is. And so afterwards, I sent in my CV. I shortly after that got invited for interview. I loved my interview. I got to meet with the two directors and also got to meet a couple of the writers working there who are now my colleagues. And that was really important to meet with those because it gave me a good insight into what life is actually like for a medical writer working at Insight. So during the interview, I also did a writing test, and I also had a writing task to take home with me. And once those had been reviewed, I'm pleased to say I was offered the job. I got accepted, and so yeah, that's where it all began for me.
So I guess the main question that everybody attending this forum wants to know is what exactly is regulatory writing? Peter has often asked us as well how it compares to MedComms writing. So I think it would be good to leave the discussion between regulatory writing and MedComms writing to the Q&A at the end, and we can highlight the similarities and differences. But for now, I can give you an overview of the regulatory writing process. So our job is to prepare formal and scientific documents that pharmaceutical companies need during the development of a drug. So this is a wide variety of documents. Some of them are used during the conduct of the studies, such as study protocols, and others are prepared at the end of the study, such as study reports. We also work on submissions, which is a pulling together of many types of study reports. So the number of documents we work on is vast. Drug development can take up to 15 years and cost in excess of $1 billion. So it's critical that at the end of the entire drug development process, the submission that's put together to get marketing authorization, that's reviewed by regional regulatory authorities, is well written, coherent messaging, unbiased. And that's our job, is to pull those documents together and give it to the regulatory authorities. Once a drug's marketed, companies are obliged to continually monitor safety for many years afterwards. So we often go back to update documents that we've worked on and do safety reporting on drugs that we've already done the marketing of. So we're there at the beginning of the drug development process, we're there at the end of the clinical phase of the drug development, and then we're there into the marketing phase as well.
So what do you need to have to be a good regulatory writer? So the first thing is being an excellent communicator. So you won't be writing or working in isolation. There won't be a day that goes by where you're not either in contact with a member of the writing team or part of the team in the client that you're working for. So you need to be able to do this confidently and effectively. Strong writing skills are a given, really. You need to have perfect written English, and you also need to be able to write in a logical and concise way. Accepting critique is something that every medical writer will have to do throughout their career. Your work will always be reviewed by your peers, so other medical writers, the client that you're working for, and also the regulatory authorities. But I'd say when you do start, one of the best ways I found of learning is having someone more senior review my work. So it's important not to take it personally and just to use any review comments as a way to improve your writing. Being organised is so important because we have lots of deadlines in our job, and we also need to be adaptable. At Insight, I'd say we consider ourselves to be a team of writers. So if, for example, another writer has a much more time pressured deadline, and perhaps what you're working on isn't so time pressured, you might be asked to work with them and support them for a bit before going back to your own project. So we have to be flexible in that sense. Calm under pressure. So as I said, we have deadlines and we can't allow these to compromise the quality of our work. So we need to make sure basically that we don't allow this to affect how good the documents are, but we also need to make sure that we do let our resource manager know, and we have a dedicated resource manager, and they will assign further support to us where needed. So being an analytical thinker, when we produce a document, we will receive lots of information from the client, and often this is very complex data, and we need to be able to find clarity in this information and present the information in a coherent way in whichever document it is that we're working on. Attention to detail. So this is one of the, I'd say it's one of the key things that Insight prides itself on. And every single document that we finalise is always subject to quality control. And this quality control is performed by another writer at Insight who hasn't actually worked on that particular project. So we can consider them to be an independent writer. And what this means is the quality control checker will go through and they will check every single number and every single word, as well as spelling and grammar, to make sure it's all correct. And this gives us an extremely high level of accuracy in all the documents that we send out, which is so important when it's to do with the regulation and the marketing of drugs. So being a team player, as I said, we don't work in isolation. You need to be able to work as a team with both the peers and the client team that you're working for as well. And finally, I'd say underpinning all of this is a life sciences qualification. We do get complex information. We don't need an expert in every therapeutic area. We work with experts, so that's not the issue, but we need to have a broad understanding of the area of life sciences, as this really helps us to present the data that we're given. So as I was reading through all of that, if you were thinking, yes, this is me, that's great. And I really do think it's an excellent career opportunity for you. good writers are always in demand. I think the pharmaceutical industry is realising more and more how important having specialist regulatory writers really is. I'd say more so than academia, it will give you a defined career pathway. I know that's something that I really liked when looking at going into medical writing. And also, particularly if you work for an agency, you will be working for multiple pharmaceutical companies and clients, and each of those will have different therapeutic areas. They focus on different diseases as well. And of course, there's all the different document types. So you will have an interesting and varied role.
So here's a typical progression in career from entry-level medical writer through to senior medical writing manager. So from Amy's level to my level. I've progressed my whole career at Insight, starting as a medical writer and now senior manager level. It's generally a natural progression and comes with skills and ability and experience over time. So when you first start as a medical writer, you work with senior and principal writers and have managers reviewing your work. And then with a few years experience and more varied document types and more experience liaising with clients, you naturally progress to senior, and then with more document types under your belt and more client liaison experience, the next progression is principal. And then if you've got the skills and want to go into management, where we work on costings, timelines, budgets and other aspects of the medical writing role, that's an opportunity as well. What is important to emphasise at Insight, all our medical writing managers still do medical writing, because we believe you can't train your junior people if you've lost the skill yourself. Guidelines and practices are evolving over time. So to be able to help your peers and also advise clients, all managers do carry on writing, but they take on review as well under their belt. So just to try and explain where we fit in during the drug development process, as I said, we're there at the beginning, the middle and the end, and then the follow-up. So basically, all new candidate drugs are first tested preclinically, which is in vitro animal models. These are often done by specialist CROs and contract research organisations that run the studies, and we're not involved in those. But we might be helping write the reports or reviewing the reports. But what we do is take the non-clinical study reports and formulate them into non-clinical submission documents for the regulators. We also look at messaging coming out of non-clinical study reports on safety and tolerability and how that will impact clinical studies. The main bulk of our work comes from phase 1 to phase 3 studies. We're involved in documents during the conduct of the study. So, for example, clinical study protocols, which detail all the methodology and it is sent to the site and how the trial should be run. We're there when the study finishes, writing up the clinical study report, and then we take clinical study reports once the drug has finished its phase 3 development, and we collate that into a submission for regulatory authorities for marketing authorization. So a typical drug will go through phase 1, which is preliminary safety and tolerability and pharmacokinetics in healthy volunteers. Then it will move into phase 2 if we're having no safety or tolerability concerns, which is testing in small patient populations, and it's where we get our preliminary demonstration of efficacy. And then phase 3 studies are generally comparative trials with best standard of care or other comparators. And it's the pivotal phase 3 studies that are the cornerstone of a marketing authorization, underpinned by the phase 2 and the phase 1. So all the documentation that goes with those studies we're involved with. And as I mentioned, after a drug has been marketed, that's not the end of the story for us. It might be as part of the marketing authorization, they got a commitment to conduct further safety and efficacy studies, for example, drug interaction studies. We would work on those. Risks evolve over time as greater understanding of a drug in a wider population is known. So we have to update other documents such as risk management plan. So for example, I still work on a drug now that I worked on when I started at Insight 15 years ago. And I have a vast knowledge of that drug from its very beginning to what's happened to it every year afterwards. So, Amy?
Thanks, Kelly. So a typical project at Insight. So what might happen to start with, or what generally happens, is we have a kick-off meeting. So this will be between the medical writers at Insight, and also the client team. And this will basically just be to go through what approach the client wants us to take, the template for the document they like to use, any background information they can give us, and also we agree timelines at this meeting as well. So once we're at the meeting, we'll then go away and we'll prepare draft 1 of the document. And throughout this time, we do stay in contact with the client to make sure we're producing the draft, as they wish and in accordance with guidelines. So when draft 1's ready, we'll send that to be reviewed by the client team. So the client team will be at least 10 people. You'll have, for example, a statistician reading it. You might have the principal investigator of a study reading it. And because we've got so many people reviewing, we quite often need to have a comment resolution meeting. And this basically allows us to discuss with the team any conflicts in the comments that we've received. So perhaps one reviewer doesn't agree with another, or we may not fully understand what a comment means. And we can discuss all of this with the client and make sure we have a good understanding of what changes they want to be made. We'll then go away and produce draft 2. And commonly after draft 2, we'll then perform the quality control, which I referred to earlier. So where the independent writer at Insight will go through and check everything in the document. After this, the document will then go back to the client team for them to review draft 2. And this will just mean that they can make sure that we've incorporated their comments as they wished, and they might have some more comments at this point as well. If needed, we would have another resolution meeting at this point. And then before finalisation, we'll make sure the document is sent to our document specialists. And these are so helpful to have in-house at Insight, because it means we can send over a document to them. They will make sure it's all formatted according to the correct template, and they will help us do things such as collate appendices as well for our documents. Most of our documents do have a lot of appendices that go with them. So basically all this will be done, and then we'll finalise the document. So there is a lot of stages that go into getting a document out of our door. So this slide was a tricky one to do really, because I'm not sure if you got the impression, but we don't really have a typical day. It is a varied job, and I'd say no 2 days are the same. But just to give you an example, so normally first thing in the morning, I would check my emails, and this is particularly because we have a global client base all the way through from America to China. So it's not uncommon to have had emails overnight. So I'll make sure I respond or action those emails as soon as I get in. I then might have a client comment review meeting, or also referred to as a comment resolution meeting. So the medical writer will normally chair this, and I'll go through the client comments there. And after that, I'll have about 3 hours of working on a clinical study report, for example. And we do try to allow ourselves a good chunk of time to work on these documents if we can. They are in depth, and it does work well if you can give yourself a chance to get in the headspace to work on that document. After that, lunch. So we do really encourage everyone at Insight to have at least, or not at least, but an hour's lunch break really. And this is because it is an intensive job. You are looking at the computer screen a lot. And so to have that hour off, get outside, get some fresh air, it really does help you engage for later on in the day. After that, I might have some training on a new client process. So if clients are updating their procedures, they quite often will want to provide us with some training on that so that we're up to date with exactly what they require from us. At Insight, we do like to celebrate everyone's birthday, so a quick 15-minute break after that for birthday cake and coffee with the rest of the team. Following that, I'd get back to working on the clinical study report that I was working on in the morning. And before I finish, I always give myself time to make sure I've got my inbox as empty as possible, respond to any meeting requests, and just make sure I've got a rough plan in place for the next day.
So my day is very similar structured to Amy's, but the types of tasks I perform are different. So I spend a lot more time in meetings, be it management meetings internally at Insight or client strategy meetings. I'm also responsible for reviewing a lot of documents for medical writers, senior medical writers, and even principal medical writers if they're new to that document type, or they just want a more senior person to review it. And also I'm responsible for in-house training, both of our medical writers, but we also often get asked by clients to train them. So I've done some submission training with clients and what goes into a dossier. So yeah, it's very similar structured day to Amy's, but very different types of task.
So training Insight medical writing is very multidimensional, I would say. So what I found to be most useful since I started is taking on the role of a supporting writer. So this has meant that I've worked with most of the principal and senior writers at Insight, and I've worked alongside them on whichever projects they're doing. So this has meant that even though I've only been at Insight for a year, I've already worked on a vast array of documents. And by working alongside a more senior writer, you learn an awful lot from them, and you don't just learn about the documents themselves, you also learn how to best interact with clients, how to chair a meeting, all those sorts of things as well, which I think are slightly harder to teach. You're much better seeing how someone else does it and learning from them. Also, when I started, I was assigned a mentor straight away. This was really nice to have. So it was just someone, so another medical writer who was there to be my go-to person, essentially. So even for things such as how do I work the photocopier, but then also for medical writing questions as well, or they could point me in the knowledge of someone who had perhaps a bit more experience in a particular document, for example. So I'd say that's the on-the-job training. We also have some more structured training. So this includes client-specific training. As I said, if they're updating their processes, they're likely to want to train us on that as well. We also have the opportunity to do external accreditations, such as those from the European Medical Writers Association. So only after being at Insight for about 4 months, I was lucky enough to go to Switzerland for some workshops provided by MWA. And this meant that I learned about some new document types and got some detailed training from experts, as well as being able to network with other medical writers. And I say the final type of training then is document-specific training, and this is normally provided in-house by someone such as Kelly or a more senior writer, and they will take us through the specifics of a document. And this isn't just for new writers. Quite often, more senior writers will come to these training sessions as well. The guidance for these documents is regularly updated, and I think it's important, no matter what stage you're at in your career, that you keep up to date with what's going on. And so, yeah, it's not uncommon for me to be joined by more senior writers in these training sessions.
So what path does a career at Insight set you on? So as I said, Insight's established. We've been established for over 18 years now, and I've been with the company 15 years, and it's grown vastly in that time. When I joined, there were 3 other writers. We now have a team of over 50 based in Oxford in the UK, and we're in another office shortly next year in Germany. So the company's been growing. It's been growing mostly because of our good brand associated with the quality of our documents. We've retained clients for years and years and years. When clients leave one company and go to another company, they take us with them because they know they'll get good quality documents from Insight. We've not had a massive marketing to improve our client base. It's just come from word of mouth and knowledge that we give good quality documents. As Amy said, we provide a supportive environment for newer writers and excellent training, both in-house and the opportunity to go to external training. And that continues throughout your career. As Amy said, guidance and practices are always changing. So we like to send senior and principal writers to learn about the new guidelines that are coming into place, new types of document and updated practices to documents.
Thanks, Kelly. So just to finish, we'd like to point out our contact details. So we are here if you want to discuss any of this in more detail. I think as Peter said at the start, but if you missed it, we do have a regulatory writing guide available on the FirstMedCommsJob.com website. And we are recruiting at the moment. So please, if you want to apply, we've got the contact details here. So send over your CV and cover letter, and selected applicants will be invited to interview. Thanks. So I'll go over to you, Peter, for the Q&As.
Excellent. Okay, and you can hear me again, yeah? Thank you very much, guys. That was great and comprehensive again, as always. So thank you very much. So to those of you listening to us today, just a reminder, you've got 2 buttons at the bottom of your screen, a chat button and the Q&A button. So both of those bring up text boxes. Please do come in with your questions, comments, observations. They're starting to come in as much as you like, using those two text boxes. And we'll talk just for another 15 minutes or so before we wrap up the recording. What I'd like to do, and I'd like to sort of set the scene slightly for the discussion, okay? Because medical writing, and we've talked about this a lot, medical right, people say to me, I want to be a medical writer, and I go, well, what do you mean by medical writer? There's lots of different sorts of medical writers. Simplistically, regulatory writing, MedComms writing are probably mostly on my radar, but there's different sort of types and shades of medical writing. We need to understand that. And what we're doing today is talking much more about the regulatory side than the MedComms side, which is what I tend to talk in. It's a spectrum though, so it's not exact, you know, you can't go, you're over there and you're over there. And as a company, I know you do a variety of services which stretch into the medical communications side. The regulatory side is what I'm trying to really understand today. And I just thought we'd just spend a couple of minutes talking about a little bit more about the sorts of work you do, and just with one eye on trying to draw the distinction between what might be arguably a more MedComms type writer role. And I think possibly one of the things that might be worth talking about a little bit more, I don't think you talked about it or said it, that for me, a regulatory writer is working on what can be very big documents. I mean, let's keep this a little bit simplistic, but you're writing on potentially very big documents that take a long time to put together because, as a submission to the authorities and so on. And the audience you're writing for are the regulatory authorities. Now, MedComms can be doing all sorts of bits and pieces, if you like, and some of them are quite big, but lots of maybe smaller type projects, and the audience is the HCPs and other types of people. So can we just talk a little bit? I mean, we're way beyond the years when I used to be, when the lorry used to drive away from the pharma company with the submission. But let's just give a sense of that difference. Kelly, can you just pick me up on this one and just try and give a sense of that sort of difference? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think you're correct there, Peter. We used to see in the, when I first started, pictures of a lorry taking a submission to the FDA. And when we were in the days of paper submission, it literally is a lorry full of documents. Now, obviously, I don't write a lorry full of documents at once. So a clinical development program will start with your preclinical, as I said. So at that point in time, we might help write the preclinical study reports. So there might be 40 of them: pharmacokinetics, toxicology, pharmacology. So that in themselves, they're not very big, but by the time you've got 50 small reports together, that's a whole vast amount of work. And then we move into the actual clinical phase, where we start with protocols, clinical study protocols, which detail all the methodology. There's a whole host of other information at that point in time, such as investigator brochures, informed consent forms. These ultimately all form part of the package for the submission. So then they'll be used, they might be updated with protocol amendments as things change. I've just had to update many protocols to put safety monitoring for COVID in, for example. There were studies that didn't need amending and then they did. So a lot of work there and a lot of amendments. And then obviously the study will finish. So you'll have your phase 1 study report with all its associated appendices and documents. Then you might have 2 or 3 phase 2 studies that form part of the package, and 1 or 2 phase 3 studies, depending what you're doing. Each of them is 100, a typical clinical study report will be about 100, 150 pages with appendices, each coming in at say 40, 50 pages, and you might have 16, 20 appendices. So obviously you can see we're building up a massive package. Then when we get to the actual submission, once we've done the whole trials, the phase 1, phase 2, the phase 3, we work on something called the Common Technical Document, which is a way of presenting submission information to regulatory authorities. All regions adhere to the Common Technical Document, and it's very specific templates that you have to provide. So you have something called, say, for example, Module 2.4 and Module 2.6, which is non-clinical written and tabulated summaries and overview. They're very specific templates that we have to complete, summarising all the detail of the preclinical. Similarly, for clinical, we have modules 2.7 and 2.5. These don't mean anything to you, but they're very rigid templates that help you. For example, module 2.74 is an overview of safety. So pulling together all the clinical safety from phase 1, phase 2, with primary focus on pivotal phase 3, and module 2.74 will be 150 pages as well. So as you can see, by the time we've got the team all finished, and a submission is vast.
So they're getting a clear picture there that you can get back. And as a writer, you can find yourself obviously working on a project for a long time because it's a big document and so on. And you know, that's sort of that is a difference between what you're doing in the MedComms typical type work, where you might be chopping and changing the projects and so on. I'm just interested, Amy. You know, you said it was great to hear that you came through to this career, as it were, through some of the stuff that we do and one of our meetings and all the rest of it, and got the opportunity to talk to Insight. So you would have been exposed to hearing about medical communications and regulatory. I don't want to talk like it's two completely different silos, but did you feel intrinsically drawn more to regulatory writing? And can you explain maybe a little bit why, or wasn't it like that?
Yeah, I think I was drawn to it pretty much straight away, but that was partly because my degree and my master's and PhD all focused on drug safety. So I already had a very big appreciation for how much goes into the development of a drug and getting it to market and all the safety aspects. So naturally, I was more drawn to the safety side of things, and that's also what regulatory writing sort of thing. So I think it did feel a bit more familiar, to be honest.
Okay, and again, slightly obvious questions, but when you've been there a year, I mean, has it turned out like that? Is it sort of exactly the way you thought it was going to be?
Yeah, it definitely has. I mean, it has been a learning curve. I mean, particularly working from home, but Insight have done a great job, you know, with adapting us for the working from home situation. But you know, I have still managed to get that support working from home. But I think what I actually hadn't realised was just how well equipped I was to make a start in this industry. You know, I did have a few doubts about myself before I started, but you don't realise, I think, sometimes when you're doing a PhD or a higher qualification, how many transferable skills you do get. You know, writing a thesis is really valuable to a regulatory writing company, presenting at conferences and putting slides together, all these sorts of skills, you know, communicating with people, organising your time. They're all things that are really useful in regulatory writing. So I'd say there is a lot to learn, and it has turned out like I hoped. I mean, some bits have been a bit harder, but also I think I've actually been a bit more, you know, amenable to it, and I found it a little bit easier in some ways than perhaps I thought I might.
Excellent. Okay. We're getting a lot of questions coming in, which is great, and there's some common themes which we can deal with in a minute. But let's just also face up to the sort of the issue of the moment, as it were. You know, we're in October 2020. In the UK, we're going back into lockdown. You know, we've got people coming in from all around the world on this video, which is on this webinar, which is great. So you know, we've had a crazy year, and we're all at slightly different stages of that. So let's just talk for a minute or two about what's going on. Your office is open, as I understand it, but not particularly, you know, well populated, because you're all comfortably working at home. You know, have you found the remote working type of approach successful? Have you? Is it working? I don't want to put the words in your mouth. So just briefly a little bit, but just at the moment, remote working, is it causing problems? Is it just business as usual? Is it actually proving more productive? Just a few words on that, Kelly, maybe.
Yeah, so I think from my perspective, we've always liked new writers to be in the office, and that would still be the preferred approach after the pandemic's over, that we feel you get the best training, mentoring and feeding off. So everybody is permanently office-based, aside from one or two more experienced writers. And Amy, when she started, she had the office environment. COVID situation has caused some issues for us, but we've adapted really easily, partly because a lot of our clients are based in China, America, Germany. So we've always done a lot of Skypes, Zooms, webinars with our clients. So from a client perspective, it's not caused issues. From a personnel perspective, it's been harder, but we've worked on innovative ways to try and keep the training going. And we do have somebody starting in a couple of weeks who will start home-based, which will be a first for us. But obviously we'll talk her through everything. We'll do Zoom, we'll do meetings, she'll attend meetings, she'll get the training. So we think it's the ideal situation at all, but we've adapted to it, and we'll adapt to it until the office reopens fully.
Okay, and just out of interest, and again, I'm drawing a comparison, which is dangerous, but in MedComms, people talk about the travel. There's lots of conference work. There's lots of, well, conference work is a big part of it, but also traveling around, meeting the clients and so on. I'm making an assumption that you don't do so much of the traveling around to the conferences. And again, I know there's a bit of a spectrum at Insight, but as a regulatory writer, that's not where you're going and that sort of activity. So you are tending to be someone who sits and writes a little bit more based in the office. At the moment, it might be at home, but is that a fair summary?
I think when you start as a medical writer and to senior medical writer, that's a fair summary. The only opportunities I think would be to M1 things. We do a lot of work with our clients over Zoom. Once you get to principal writer level and management level, we do go out to see a lot of clients, pitching for new work or for a submission strategy meeting. So it's not uncommon that I go to America every year or two when I've been working with clients for submissions. I've been to Germany, I've been to France. So it's definitely not on the scale of a MedComms writer where you're out a lot, but I would say at my level, within a year before COVID, I'd been to France in January and Germany in February, and I probably would have gone away a couple more times this year. So yeah, 3 to 4 times a year to visit clients, but not conferences.
So certain jobs are part of it, but you're not setting up and running conferences in the way that maybe the medical communications guys are doing, sort of thing. Yeah. Okay.
Not as a regulatory writer.
As a regulatory writer. Okay. And we have got quite a few questions. Let's try and pick off some of these questions, and there's a few common themes appearing. Let's start with the basics. Yeah. We've got several questions. It's almost the inevitable question with our webinars about this sort of topic. Do we need a PhD to get into this business? How competitive it is, and so on. So, Amy, you've come in with a PhD. Did you find that it was necessary to have the PhD? Do you find it useful to have the PhD? What's the thinking about whether you need a PhD or not?
So I'd say Insight, we do value the PhD. We don't say it's mandatory, but naturally we do. The candidates that do better in the interview and in the writing test do have PhDs, and it is worth noting at the moment all of our writers do have PhDs. So I guess interpret that how you will. We don't say it's mandatory, but we certainly do appreciate what you gain from a PhD, and we do value a PhD. And
you found it useful having the PhD going into the business?
Certainly, I think, yeah.
Difficult for you to compare and contrast because you don't really like that. But...
Yeah, it is difficult. But as I said, I think you do gain a lot of transferable skills from doing a PhD, a lot of independent learning, and you have to manage your own time, manage your projects, and all of those things are really transferable.
And it's research skills and the data analysis and all those sorts of things, and teamwork and all this. But I mean, Kelly, on that note, you're probably in the position where you're interviewing for people for these positions. So, is that similar comments, or have you got anything to add to that in terms of the desire for a PhD?
Yeah, no, I think it's exactly what Amy said. We don't stipulate that it's mandatory, but we do find that when they come for interview and do the writing test, that people with a PhD naturally do better on the writing test and naturally better at the interview with their transferable skills than those without. As Amy said, everybody does have a PhD at the moment, but in the past we've had 1 pharmacist who didn't and 2 medics. So again, we're not saying you have to have one, but it's on a case-by-case basis, and we will probably find that people with a PhD do better.
Okay, and the flip side of it is, which I think is worth emphasising, because I've had these conversations with PhD postdocs in the past. It's like it's worth emphasising the fact this is a business that welcomes a PhD postdoc.
Yeah.
And actually, so if you're sitting there thinking, oh, I don't know whether this is actually led, actually, this is a business, you're a company specifically that would welcome PhD postdoc experience. Do you particularly look for industry experience, or is that not so important or so often the case?
We don't look for medical writing experience. We prefer to train in-house. So if you're completely new out of academia like Amy, we would take that as great. People often have postdocs or maybe worked for pharmaceutical for a short period in some other roles. So again, but I don't think industry experience is something that we expect you to have. Yeah, I think we prefer to train up our medical writing our own in-house way.
Okay, I've got you. So there are a lot of questions here. So what I was just trying to find one which I've lost, but let's just talk a bit more generally because it's come in from several places again. I mean, again, perhaps it's emphasised at the moment because of the situation we're in, but the remote working type question, you've said quite clearly that certainly pre-lockdown, you would have wanted people to come into the office and get trained in the office. Clearly you are, and again, you've said it is different at the moment, and you're bringing somebody on board remotely and so on. But do you sort of get, and again, just briefly, do you have a sense that this is the way it's going to go, and there'll be more people coming on board, and you'll be more relaxed about doing it remotely? Or do you think, as fast as you can, you'll get back to the office situation? And allied to that, because it's come up several times, let's just be very clear on this. You know, can somebody working, I don't know where these people are, but somebody was asking, but the example I always use when I have this conversation, if you're in Singapore, can you get a job with Insight Medical Writing? You know, and if not, why not, sort of thing. So just that remote working, the idea that you could join in from wherever you are.
Yeah, our policy has always been that entry-level medical writers, we prefer them to be in the office. We can train them up, we can guide them. All our senior and principal writers are in the office, and managers to mentor them. Obviously, COVID has changed the world, so working is different now, and we've trained Amy continually throughout. So I think our view is that after all this is over, we would like as many people to go back to the office and work and support. But level position, we would say yes, office based.
Okay, so we're trying to get back to that situation. You did say something about Germany. I think you're opening up in Germany. Is that right?
We are, yes.
Okay, but the example of someone in Singapore, as I understand it, actually you can't legally, you can't actually take on people. There's got to be sort of like legal entity in the country. So so people from Singapore wouldn't be able to work with Insight Medical Writing. Well, but as a global business, there are clearly companies all over the world doing this sort of work. Yeah. Yeah,
so regulatory writing happens within pharmaceutical companies. A lot of pharmaceutical companies have a small team of their own medical writers, and outsourced to companies like us for support, or some companies don't have. So yes, in Singapore there'll be opportunities within pharmaceutical companies for regulatory writing positions, or maybe agencies similar to Insight. Definitely.
Okay. And there's again questions about some of the expertise around you. Have you got in-house statisticians, or would you be having statistical support from the pharma company itself?
We always have statistical support from the pharmaceutical companies, but we do have associate statisticians that we've worked with over the years, and we will bring them on board if ask us. We have a number of them that we know are good, and we've worked with them over the years that we work with.
Okay. I think I've got one eye on the clock because we're slightly running over again. I don't know, I'm going to be a bit unfair, Amy. If you were going to say to somebody who was thinking about joining regulatory writing, have you got sort of a tip that you could just throw them and go, this is the sort of thing to be thinking about, or this would be good on your CV, or just think about this before you move? This is a bit unexpected. Sorry, I should have prepared you for that one.
No, it's fine. I think it's perhaps it's nothing extraordinary, really. I think what we look for in particular is it's quite difficult generally you can see someone's got a PhD, or you can see someone's got a master's, but it's quite difficult to know, do they have that attention to detail? Do they have that eye for writing coherently, correctly? Do they care about the work they're doing? So every single communication you have with us will be assessing in some way, not formally, but if you send us an email with your CV in, and you say in your CV that you have attention to detail, but your email has a spelling mistake in, it's not going to look great. So just you need to think about it from as soon as you start your application with us, that we are looking for this attention to detail and this excellent writing style. So I'd say just be conscious of that throughout, and just in your CV, show examples of writing you've done. If you've done different sorts of things, some people have done science blogs or that sort of stuff. Anything like that on your CV is great. Just any other writing experience looks really good.
Excellent. Okay, go on. Last word to you, Kelly. You've got something to throw in to wrap us up? That didn't make sense as a sentence, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think, as Amy said, we don't formally assess everything, but we do. The minute an email comes in, we judge it and whether that would be a suitable person to bring to interview. And then we look at, say, the CV itself, the formatting, the structure, the content. If you've got a 4-page CV that's listed everything you've ever done, it shows us that your ability to be concise isn't very well established. So yeah, we are looking as a writing agency for a well-written email, a well-written cover letter, and a well-written CV. And as Amy said, not necessarily any writing experience, but that's a bonus. But obviously we're judging you on what you're sending us.
Okay. Look, let's wrap this up now because we are a little bit over, and I want to finish this as a recording. For those of you who are listening to us online, don't run away because we've still got 10 minutes. We can carry on talking, and there's a lot of these questions we can pick off. What I would say is maybe two things to wrap up. Firstly, in terms of Insight, the easiest thing is to say go to the website because there's information about applying for careers and so on. You included some information in the slides as well. But I guess you know, if reaching out to you on LinkedIn and things, that you'd be very happy to hear from people. So audience, please follow up, take a look at the website and follow up if you're interested in the career. From a more general point, from my point of view, everybody, you know, there's lots and lots of information about MedComms and associated businesses, closely associated like regulatory or less so, at FirstMedCommsJob.com, and we do lots and lots of things at MedComsNetworking.com. So these Wednesday webinars are continuing. Please come and join us again. Any questions I can help with, please do give me a shout. So for today, for this, I'm going to wrap up. I'm going to say a big thank you. I'm just going to ask everybody to wave because we have a bit of a wave. It's a bit of a thing now, and I'll stop the recording. So bye bye everybody. Cheers.